So this isn't going to be your usual video on warming up, because let's face it, warming up usually is pretty boring. It's like the vegetables of training. It's that thing you have to do at the start of your workout before you can do the actual fun stuff. You're just kind of jumping around without really much idea of what you're supposed to be doing when you really just want to be getting work done. Warming up is just this annoying foreplay. But it doesn't have to be that way, because warming up isn't just this thing you have to do to not get injured. It also can enhance your performance significantly. And if you do it correctly, warming up actually has benefits all its own as well. It can actually work as part of your training. What we really need to do here is to properly understand the science of warming up. What is it that we're actually achieving? What are we doing when we're warming up? And how can we make sure we do that quickly, efficiently, and in a way that's going to massively benefit our training? Well, that's what we're going to find out in a minute. But before we get started, first an admission, because when I was younger, I used to not warm up at all. In fact, I used to say that warming up was for wimps, which, yeah, is a bit cringe to hear now. But what I do is I go straight to the gym and start performing my max bench press, which was like 2 times body weight at the time. And I'd be doing pull-ups and muscle-ups completely from cold. And whilst I don't recommend it, and whilst I learned pretty quickly that this isn't something that everyone should be doing, it was interesting that I never got injured from this. And there's a few reasons that might have been the case, including individual differences. And I think by understanding these things, we can better understand how to perform our warm-ups optimally and avoid injury and enhance performance. Something you might be wondering reasonably is, do you actually need to warm up when you warm up? As in, is it important to raise your body temperature? Is this a key part of the process? And the answer is actually yes. Warming up has a number of beneficial effects on the body. For one, heating up muscle and tendon actually makes it more pliable, much like heating any viscous material like honey. For another, it also actually increases nerve conduction velocity, meaning that you can transmit signals more rapidly and potentially increase your reflexes. And on top of all that, it also helps with a number of enzymatic reactions that support muscle contraction, things like the breakdown of glucose and glycogen. So yeah, actually heating up is important. It's not just a clever name. Cheesy. At the same time, warming up and moving the joint gently really does lubricate the joint. This isn't just a metaphor. As you move around gently, this stretches the joint capsule, and that stimulates the synovial membrane to squeeze out more synovial fluid and to ramp up production. At the same time, as you increase the heat around the area, this actually makes that fluid more viscous so that it does its job a little bit better, isn't quite so sticky and tar-like. But while that stuff's important, I think it's increasing blood flow to the muscles that's really going to make the difference in terms of your performance. How do you do, sir? So jumping rope, or another form of light aerobic exercise, is a great way to start your warm-up. And there's a few reasons for that. Of course, initially, we're opening up the lungs, the airways, increasing the heart rate. This is allowing us to get more blood and oxygen around the body. But specifically, we're also increasing our production of adrenaline. And this is important because adrenaline prepares the body for fight or flight, or in this case, exercise. So one of the reasons that I might have been able to get away with doing less of a warm-up in my youth is that I actually have high resting levels of adrenaline, as I've mentioned on this channel before, and that means that blood goes more quickly, more readily to the muscles where it's needed. Because adrenaline increases your heart rate, it triggers a cascade of other excitatory neurotransmitters, but at the same time it also acts on certain receptors which alter the way that blood flows around the body, specifically the A adrenergic and B2 adrenergic receptors. So these receptors trigger contractions in the blood vessels, causing them to become narrower or wider. The A adrenergic receptors are found throughout the body, and when adrenaline acts on these, it causes your blood vessels to contract, to restrict themselves, so they get smaller. However though, when adrenaline acts on the B2 adrenergic receptors, which are found more specifically in skeletal muscle tissue, this causes them to dilate, to get larger. This means you're creating a pressure differential, so that the blood vessels that supply blood to your organs and other parts of your body, your digestion, stuff like that, are getting narrower, making it harder for blood to get in, and the blood vessels supplying the muscles are getting wider and more relaxed, allowing more blood to get in. It's being squeezed to the muscles, therefore meaning you have more oxygen, more blood, more nutrients to perform optimally as a result of performing this kind of exercise and increasing your adrenaline. There are many different forms of aerobic training you can use to achieve this. I personally really like jump rope as one of my go-to options. That's not only because it's a full body exercise, meaning you get more blood around the entire body and more quickly, but also because it's something that has many other benefits as well. It's a skill that you can develop. It makes you lighter on your feet. It builds ankle stiffness for things like sprinting and jumping. It's just an excellent exercise. It even builds stronger calves. That brings me to today's sponsor, which is Crossrope. Crossrope make some of the best jump ropes in the business. They use proprietary materials on their ropes so that they don't get tangled, so they don't get damaged over time. They seem to last forever. They have advanced spin mechanics in the handles themselves, which make them spin more smoothly. They're really easy to attach and detach, meaning that you can swap out different handles, different ropes, and the reason you might want to do this is because Crossrope also make a range of different weighted ropes. This one's £5, I think, and basically that means that I'm getting a slight shoulder workout at the same time as training my lower body. Whichever one you choose, use the link down below and code BIONEER at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Thanks again to Crossrope for sponsoring this video, and now on with the show. Now, as many of you guys know, I've been training for a long time with very high repetition sets of basic bodyweight movements, closed chain movements like the push-up, the air squat, the chin-up, and I believe this could have played a role in my ability to train without a long warm-up as well. Basically, what this does is to increase blood supply to the muscles by pooling blood as you're training. There's no direct studies demonstrating this, but you can follow the bread trail and see how they might be connected. And I've made lots of videos discussing this in the past. Suffice to say that by keeping the focus on specific muscle groups, you make it harder for the blood to get in and out, and your body responds by creating more blood supply to those muscles. Then if you combine this with higher adrenaline, you might not only have a greater propensity to push blood towards the muscles, but also more inroads, more ways to supply the muscles. So whilst this is purely hypothetical, what I'm saying is that potentially by training with higher repetition, basic movements focusing on specific muscles, you may be able to reduce the time it takes you to warm up for training. And other full body aerobic exercises like running also increase full body angiogenesis, and there are studies demonstrating this. So this might also help you to perform more quickly, to get the most out of your body when there isn't time to warm up. Because in the real world, there isn't always time to warm up. Of course, there's lots of other ways we can increase adrenaline, such as drinking caffeine, which will increase adrenaline, raise your heart rate. Essentially, it's like a warm-up in a cup. This is why pre-workouts contain huge amounts of caffeine. It has been shown definitively to improve performance in the gym. And then this is combined with things like beta-alanine, which act as vasodilators to further help dilate the blood vessels and help blood get flowing to the muscles, in theory. I personally am not the biggest fan of using things like caffeine as a pre-workout, because it just lacks nuance. You're just hijacking your system and ramping it up. Because when you're training, your muscles release byproducts which have all kinds of different impacts on the way your body works. For example, adenosine gets released as a byproduct of exercise, and this is another vasodilator. It gets more blood flowing to the muscles. But caffeine blocks the adenosine receptors, meaning that you're not going to get as much oxygen and blood to the muscles specifically. Although you have a global increase in vasodilation if you're taking a pre-workout, you might find that you have a little bit extra constriction in the working muscles. I'm just saying it lacks nuance. It's not as delicate as the body's own processes for increasing adrenaline. And just jacking something up to try and get the most performance, I don't think is necessarily always the best idea. Not to mention that caffeine can cause anxiety. It makes the muscles tenser, which can actually inhibit performance, particularly if you're doing a mobility routine. So it kind of depends on your goals and your own reaction to caffeine. I'm just saying, personally, I don't know, it's a bit artificial. In other words, I think something like this, pretty much useless. Of course, there are many other ways you can increase adrenaline, boost your heart rate, and one of my very favourite is just to listen to awesome music. And we know intuitively that this increases adrenaline, but that's also true according to these studies. This is a great way to get yourself hyped for a workout, to prime your mood, and actually the studies show that the best way to do this is to create a playlist that starts with a slower tempo and then builds up gradually over time. And this is a great way to increase our own tempo, as it were, in keeping, rather than just going straight from cold and depressed to suddenly massive drums and rock. And you can throw me to the wolves, 'cause I am undefeated. unbeatable. So don't lean into that bad mood. Try putting on some decent music, bouncing around your kitchen, and you might just bring yourself to do that workout after all. Another way to increase adrenaline and get yourself pumped for workout without relying on caffeine or other chemicals is by watching something that gets you pumped. So for me, that might be a Jackie Chan montage or a clip from Dragon Ball Z, something like that. In fact, the other day I was feeling a bit burned out. I wasn't really in the mood to train at all. I think I was recovering from some kind of injury and some kind of bug and hadn't had much sleep because my son had been keeping me awake all night, and I was in a kind of bad mood. And I was meant to be working out, but I'd kind of already decided I wasn't going to do it that day. But then I was scrolling YouTube and I saw an outtakes montage from the new Jackie Chan film Ride On. And so I watched it, and it had him singing in the background, which made me kind of nostalgic, because although this was a new song, it just reminded me of the old tracks he used to record for his movies that I loved growing up. I think in one scene he fell off a horse and then he just break falls and gets up just fine, age 69. This guy was one of my heroes growing up, and it was just so inspiring seeing this. Not only getting me pumped by watching, clips of fighting, but also just seeing one of my heroes still moving at this age was so inspiring that I thought, you know what, I'm gonna hit the gym, and I had a really good workout. So now we've done our full body aerobic exercise to warm up. We've got blood flowing around the body a little bit more than we did before. Now we want to focus on getting that blood specifically to the muscle groups we're going to be using. So to do this, we want to train with something that's a bit more isolated, that focuses on a particular muscle group. This then sends the blood even more to those muscles that we're using. It does this in a couple of ways. Firstly, some of the byproducts released as a result of using the muscle will further dilate the blood vessels in those muscles, thus helping the blood to flow in that direction. At the same time though, the muscle is also now actually working like some kind of pump. So as the muscle contracts, it squeezes the blood out of the blood vessels, and then when it relaxes again, the blood is able to fill back in. This ensures a nice turnover of fresh blood, keeping it pumping and flowing into those working muscles. So how do we do this? Well, we can use a few simple exercises, things like knee circles, arm windmills, that kind of thing, that's going to get the blood flowing to the area we want and nicely lubricate the joints. But better yet is to use warm-up sets or to use activation exercises. So a warm-up set basically involves doing the exercise you're going to do for your workout, but you're doing it with either no weight at all or very, very lightweight. So for example, if you're going to be doing heavy squats, then for your warm-up set, you'll just squat with a really light barbell. This way you're able to practice the movement and activate the muscles. Similarly, an activation exercise is basically an exercise designed to specifically teach you, remind you how to move correctly, and to get the correct muscles working and engaged, get yourself feeling those muscles so that when you then perform the movements that follow, you're able to do so properly. So for example, here you might perform something like a glute bridge prior to doing your squats, and that way you're ensuring that you're engaging the glutes and not quad dominant, for example. Both of these will have the effect of sending more blood to those specific muscle groups, but at the same time, it'll also allow you to rehearse the movements and make sure that you're using the correct movement pattern. But this isn't just a convenient way, a nice way to practice the movement. It actually goes a bit deeper than that, and there's some interesting science showing how using activation exercises and warm-up sets allows you to recruit more muscle fiber so that you can exert more power and force and wake up the signals to and from the muscles, increasing your proprioception, your balance, your body awareness, and more, which we'll talk about when we get to my office. I don't know if filming like this is safe. I mean, I talk to friends in the car, so presumably it's not that much different from that, and I've seen other YouTubers do it, but I think I'm gonna make this a one-off because my multitasking isn't always my strong suit. So I do recommend you do some general movement in the areas that you're going to train, things like your knee circles and your windmills, because this can actually help to lubricate the joints and get them moving, make them more pliable, reduce your chance of injury. Beyond that though, the warm-up sets and the activation exercises are also really important, and there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, it's going to help you to establish more of a mind-muscle connection. Now before you accuse me of bro science here, think about how many of us will train. We'll spend our whole day sitting at a desk on our butts, squishing our glutes in this awkward, tight posture, Then we go to the gym and start lifting really heavy weights. Just doing a little bit of aerobic exercise for your warm-up isn't going to cut it. You've basically crushed the life out of your butt and forgotten how to use it. You've forgotten how to move properly, and now you're far more likely to move incorrectly and cause an injury. So I start every workout now with glute bridges, for example, to really feel my glutes and to remind myself how to hinge the hip properly, so that when I'm doing a deadlift or something like that, I'm not going to injure myself. So practicing in this way, either with exercises designed to engage the muscles in the correct way, or with your warm-up sets, can help you to send a stronger signal subsequently to those muscles and to inhibit the surrounding muscles so that you're doing it properly. For example, this can help us to reduce inhibitory signals. So over time, if we're not using a muscle at all, we can actually begin to inhibit it and not feel it in the same way. So imagine if there's a clock in the background of a room. When you first walk in, you notice it ticking loudly, but over time you forget it's there completely because you're actually inhibiting that tick-tocking sound. At the same time, this can help to combat what's called synergistic dominance, which is where you're allowing the synergistic muscles, the supporting muscles, to do most of the work that should be done by the prime mover. Again, the obvious example here is someone who's quad dominant and who's using their quads to perform movements like jumps when they really should be engaging the glutes more. Fundamentally, what we're doing here is priming the neural pathways and the muscles for activation. When you perform a certain movement, it becomes easier to perform it subsequently for a little bit. And this is called post-activation potentiation. Essentially, when certain neurons fire in the brain responsible for movement, they don't return to the same resting state. They return to a slightly higher resting state, making it easier to then trigger another action potential. What you basically need to know is that they remain warmed up effectively so that they can start again more easily. Thus, it becomes easier for the same neural pathways to fire, generating more efficient movement patterns. This is why contrast training works. This is why if you do a really heavy squat, you're then going to be able to jump really high onto a box afterwards. And it's why you feel all bouncy when you come off of a trampoline. But of course, this doesn't last that long. It lasts 30 to 60 seconds. So if you want to get the benefits of contrast training, post-activation potentiation, you need to go straight from your heavy reps straight into jumping onto that box. We don't just have post-activation potentiation, we also have a post-activation performance enhancement. And this lasts longer. It's saying that even though the resting state of the neurons return to a lower state eventually, we retain a little bit of enhanced performance for much longer, up to 30 minutes or even beyond that. This is due to some of the warming up factors we talked about already, the increased heart rate, adrenaline, blood flow to the muscles, etc. But it's also still due to some changes within the neurons thanks to something called dynamical synapses, or short-term plasticity. So for example, and I won't go into this in too much detail because you don't need to know it, and I did make a video on this already. If you want that, then check out my video on priming. But for example, short-term synaptic facilitation is another process through which neurons become more likely to fire. That's because action potentials aren't just about electrical charges. When a neuron fires, it also releases neurotransmitters, which alter the way that it interacts with the neurons around it. After neurotransmitters have been released from the vesicles, it becomes subsequently easier for those neurotransmitters to be released again, thanks to changes in the calcium ion concentration. Vesicles being like little containers which hold onto the neurotransmitters at the end of the presynaptic neurons. Essentially, this means that neural pathways will fire more easily when they've already fired before, or at least it will alter the way they fire. So when you perform these movements, you're priming and readying the brain to perform them again. Now, of course, if you haven't just been sat still all day, but you've been active and moving throughout the day, if you've been walking and stretching, been using your body, then you might find you're not as seized up as someone who has sat in one place all day. And this is something else to consider, is that if you're more active and if you make an effort to be more active throughout the day, then you're not going to need to warm up for as long as somebody who has just been sat in one position. You could even really make the argument that we shouldn't have to warm up much at all. If you think about your dog, for example, if they see a bird or a squirrel on the other side of the road, they're not going to stop and do lunges and knee circles, they're just going to blast across without giving it a second thought. They're ready to spring into action at any time. After a long nap, they might do something called a pandiculation. This is kind of like that big stretchy yawn they do. This helps to activate and engage the muscles, improve proprioception, but that's all they really need to do. It is also worth noting that you can even use a kind of mindfulness meditation, a body scan meditation, to focus on relaxing and contracting the muscles, and that way to reawaken your mind-muscle connection. Another useful function of a good warm-up is to act as a kind of diagnostics test to see how your body's performing. For example, I was just at the gym and I was going to do some handstand push-ups, but I discovered that my elbow was a little bit dicky and I wasn't aware of that. So instead of going hard, I decided to go easy and cut my workout short. This way I avoid a minor niggle becoming a serious injury by going too hard. And this is actually yet another reason you don't want too much adrenaline, because it is a natural painkiller and it can blunt your senses to these sorts of things. Have you ever considered that if you're unable to ramp your body up to its fullest naturally, then maybe that's a sign that you shouldn't be training hard, not that you should take artificial products to try and jack it up anyway. Listen to your body. And that brings us on to the controversial topic of stretching. And it might seem mad that stretching as part of a warm-up could be controversial, but if you guys are interested in this stuff, then you already know the story by now. There was a time that stretching static stretches, holding a static stretch, often a passive stretch, forcing yourself into a greater range of motion than you can achieve comfortably on your own, was the norm for a warm-up. However, over time, studies came out showing that this could actually increase our risk of injury and reduce our performance. And this makes sense because if you're carrying a little bit of tension in the muscle, if it's shorter, then it's going to be easier for it to quickly contract. On the other hand, if it's loose and relaxed, then this is actually going to make it a little bit less efficient at quickly contracting to, say, for example, catch you if you're falling or slow down a movement and preventing a hyperextension. So suddenly nobody likes doing static stretches and passive stretches as part of their warm-up. They might do dynamic stretches, things like high kicks, etc., but they're going to avoid anything like pancake stretches or straddle stretches, shoulder stretches prior to their workout. And yeah, this makes sense, but I just think we need to be a little bit cautious about potentially throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater here. But we act like this is this terrible thing that if you do a little bit of passive stretching, you're definitely going to injure yourself. But JC Santana pointed out to me that most athletes still do this kind of stretching prior to a game in the changing room. It's pretty normal. And when you think about it, we were doing this kind of stretching prior to training for years, decades, before anyone noticed there was anything wrong with it. So it can't have been that bad for us, and maybe it's a bit of an extreme reaction to treat it like this kind of kryptonite that's going to cause us harm. Not only that, but depending on the type of stretch, depending on what part of your body you're stretching, depending on the type of workout you're doing, it may still have some benefit. For example, what if you were to stretch only the antagonist muscles? If you had a very specific workout in mind and you stretched only antagonistic muscles, this could actually increase your performance because now you'd have less resistance provided by those antagonistic muscles. You could jump higher, punch harder, run faster. You would also potentially be increasing your likelihood of injury, however, because now you've got less of the antagonistic muscle to slow down and control the movement. So, you know, pros and cons. What shows even more promise though is performing stretches that have a strength component, mobility exercises rather than pure flexibility exercises, where you're putting yourself in that position often against resistance, things like the ATG split squat or something like a very deep squat holding a weight. This has been shown to actually improve power output and potentially reduce your chance of injury because you're increasing your strength in those end range positions. You're still getting into those deep stretches, but you're doing so in a way that's actually going to enhance your performance by giving you more control and strength and power in those positions. And I personally will even use some static passive stretches when I want to perform a particular movement. So for example, if I'm doing handstands, then stretching my shoulders will allow me to do better handstands. Whatever the studies say, this is the reality for me, and I don't think it's very likely that it's going to increase my likelihood of injury all that much. It does depend a lot on how stiff you are to begin with. If you're very restricted in terms of your movement, then a little bit of extra mobility might be just what you need. This section is not about giving you concrete advice. I'm not here to tell you that you should ignore all this recent research and everyone telling you not to passive stretch before a workout. All I want to say is that this topic is a bit more complex than some people would have you believe. I think the jury is still out. I think it's very much about individual differences and different scenarios. So do your own research, go gentle, but yeah, definitely watch this space. So if we're going to take all of this theory and all these ideas and create a kind of warm-up plan that anyone can apply, Obviously it's going to be different depending on who you are and depending on what kind of workout you're about to do. That said, you could start by watching something or listening to some music that's going to get you pumped and prime your mood. At the same time, you should be doing some sort of aerobic exercise, such as jumping rope, something full body to get the heart rate flowing and increase adrenaline. This should last about 5 to 10 minutes until you reach about 50 to 75% of your max heart rate. But don't go too intense because you don't want to tire yourself out for later. Then you're going to move on to something a little bit more localized, so whether that's knee circles, arm windmills. This is going to help to lubricate the joints, it's going to help get blood flowing in that area and improve your general movement. Then you might want to move on to either warm-up sets or activation exercises to prepare yourself for the movement and make sure you're moving through it correctly. Whether or not you include stretches there is up to you. Like I say, this is an area for further research and it's going to depend on you and your goals and how you respond to it. But yeah, that's it. So warm-up can be something pretty short, really, depending on who you are and your goals. It could take no more than 10 to 15 minutes. You might still think of it as a nuisance, but I think the way to think about it is as a part of your workout, not as something you have to do prior to your workout. You could even say that this is more important than the workout that follows, because what good is it being able to bench press a huge amount of weight if you can't squat down to the ground or bend over to tie up your shoelace? So yeah, don't see your warm-ups as a waste of time, see them as part of your training. Well guys, that was pretty in-depth, but hopefully useful. Let me know if there's anything I missed. Let me know in the comments down below how you warm up. And if you're looking for a training program that trains you in a way that goes beyond just aesthetics or just strength on a few lifts, something that's going to improve your strength, mobility, cardio, brain function even, proprioception, then check out the link to my ebook and training program, Super Functional Training 2.0. It comes with over 2 hours of instructional footage and an 80+ page ebook. That also comes with a full warm-up that you can follow along with and that includes all of these concepts and more, and that you can adapt as you need to. Thanks again to Crossrate for sponsoring this video, and either way guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.